Мужчина в опасности, он будет убит до полудня. A man is in danger.
At cruising altitude, we trigger the secondary engine failure. We jump at 10,000 feet. He goes down with the plane.
Brianna Harris was invisible. That was how she survived. 20 years old, with 2 days left on her temporary contract at Meridian Private Air Terminal's VIP lounge, she wiped marble counters while billionaires walked past her as if she were part of the decor. Every dollar she earned was already owed to the hospital treating her younger sister. At 8:45 a.m., 2 uniformed pilots stood near the espresso machine quietly talking to each other. They thought they were alone. They thought no one understood. Brianna did. At cruising altitude, we trigger the secondary engine failure. We jump at 10,000 feet. He goes down with the plane. Her hand froze around the rag. Across the lounge sat Nam Tae-sik in a charcoal suit, composed and untouchable, the most feared man in the city. Through the glass walls, his jet waited on the tarmac. She had exactly 12 minutes before the most dangerous man in the city boarded a flight he would never survive. Brianna learned Russian from her mother's old cassette tapes, the only belongings she kept after the rain-slicked highway crash that killed both her parents 4 years ago. At 16, she became guardian to her 11-year-old sister, Tashia, trading college dreams for early shifts and overdue notices. Language became her refuge. She would repeat phrases late at night until the accent felt natural, never imagining it would one day place her at the center of a murder plot. Meridian's VIP lounge was supposed to be temporary. 3 months of polished floors, forced smiles, and invisibility. In 2 days, her contract would end. After that, she had nothing lined up. Tashia's condition was worsening. The recommended procedure could not wait much longer. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating businessmen with espresso cups and tablet screens. The scent of coffee replaced the usual evening whiskey. And Brianna moved through the space like part of the furniture, silent, efficient, unnoticed. Nam Tae-sik arrived just after 8:30 a.m., sharp and composed, dressed for a high-stakes business flight. At his side stood Shin Woo, warm and attentive, the perfect shadow. Across the lounge, 2 pilots talked quietly to each other over espresso before boarding. They switched to Russian without thinking. Brianna did not mean to listen, but she heard every word. Secondary engine failure, parachutes in cargo. Half the payment already transferred. Through the bright morning glass, she could see the jet waiting under clear daylight. Departure was scheduled for exactly 8:57 a.m., a 12-minute window. She tried security. Dismissed. She tried her manager. Threatened. Alone in a service corridor with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, Brianna stared at the staff intercom panel. If she was wrong, she would lose her job. If she was right and said nothing, a man would die before noon. She pressed the button and spoke in flawless Russian, then English. The words echoed across the tarmac speakers. Outside, the roar of the waiting jet's engines was deafening. Nam Tae-sik was too far away and close to the noise to hear Brianna's voice, but he saw the immediate chaotic reaction. One of the pilots went pale. Shin Woo's hand tightened imperceptibly at his side. The head of security looked sharply toward the aircraft. That was enough. Tae-sik stopped walking. Hello, family. Welcome back to Afro K Mafia Diary. Before we dive into today's explosive story, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into it. Brianna Harris watched the red digits of the lounge clock tick over to 8:15 a.m., 48 hours. That was exactly how long she had before her contract evaporated, taking her only lifeline with it. Behind the polished marble welcome desk, she stood perfectly still, but her pulse hammered against her throat. In her locker, her phone held 3 new messages from the hospital billing department, all marked urgent. Her 11-year-old sister, Tashia, was running out of time, and Brianna was out of money. She hadn't slept in 3 days, surviving on stale break-room coffee and sheer quiet panic. 4 years ago, a rain-slicked highway had taken their parents and forced Brianna to become a protector overnight. Now, that same suffocating terror was back. She tightened her grip on the edge of the desk until her knuckles turned white, forcing her breathing to slow. She couldn't afford to break. Not today. She smoothed her uniform jacket, pasted on a flawless, invisible smile, and braced herself. The morning rush was about to hit. The glass doors of the VIP lounge slid open at 8:43 a.m. and the oxygen seemed to vanish from the room. Nam Tai-sik didn't just walk in, he commanded the space without making a sound. He wore a charcoal gray suit, his dark eyes sweeping the room with a cold, predatory stillness. Beside him was Shin Woo, a broader man scanning the lounge for threats and exits before he even fully entered. Around them, the atmosphere instantly tightened. Junior staff suddenly scrambled. A senior attendant choked on his own breath, quickly straightening his tie. Nobody spoke. Nobody laughed. Brianna watched from the desk, her muscles locked. She had served wealthy men before, but this was entirely different. This wasn't money. This was raw, lethal power, the kind that didn't need an introduction because everyone was already terrified of it. At exactly 8:45 a.m., two pilots in crisp uniforms stood by the espresso machine just outside the lounge. They weren't laughing. They were talking quietly to each other, heads close together, and voices low and strictly professional. Then, a seamless shift. Russian. Brianna had spent years studying the language. She didn't just understand it, she felt it in her bones, and what she heard made the blood drain from her face. The taller pilot didn't hesitate. Secondary engine failure. The second pilot nodded, checking his watch. Fuel regulation interference. A 4-minute window above the mountain range. Parachutes secured in the maintenance hatch. They were discussing a massacre with the casual calm of men checking the weather. The plan was locked. The payment from Shin Woo was already clearing. All that was left was the execution. Brianna's hands turned to ice around the tray she was holding. She didn't move. She couldn't. The words echoed in her skull like gunshots. Flight KA-7 wasn't just a morning departure. It was a flying coffin. The mechanical fault wouldn't trigger a single alarm on the tarmac. But it would wait until they hit maximum altitude over the mountains, leaving zero chance of survival for the passengers. And the man who had just paid for the hit was currently standing 3 feet away from Nam Tai-sik. Her mind raced, violently snapping back to the night her parents died on that wet highway. The metallic crunch, the absolute helplessness. No, not again. She slammed the tray down on the counter. Her heart was battering against her ribs. She had to act, now. She intercepted the nearest security officer by the terminal entrance. She spoke fast, her voice low and sharp. The flight number, the engine wiring, the altitude, the timeline. The heavyset man just blinked at her over his coffee cup, his eyes full of irritated disbelief. He made a lazy phone call, then brushed her off. "The pilots are cleared. Go back to work." Panic clawing at her throat, she cornered her manager next. Mr. Holt didn't even let her finish the sentence. See, he jabbed a finger in her face, threatening to terminate her contract on the spot if she didn't shut up and smile. The clock hit 8:49 a.m. The boarding call was imminent. Every authority figure had turned their back. If she wanted to stop a murder, she was completely on her own. 12 minutes. That was the exact total window she had from the moment she overheard them at 8:45 a.m. before flight KA-7 pushed back at 8:57 a.m. Her manager was glaring at her from across the room. The security guard was ignoring her. Through the glass, the massive engines of the private jet were already beginning to whine. She looked at the staff intercom panel mounted on the wall, the direct line to the tarmac speakers. If she did this, her job was gone. Her only way to pay Tashia's medical bills would vanish. But if she walked away, 29 people would be dead before noon. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely grip the plastic receiver. She ripped it off the wall. Awa slammed her thumb down on the broadcast button and spoke. Loud, clear, flawless Russian, then English. She exposed the engine, the parachutes, the mountain range. The entire VIP lounge froze in dead silence. She had used 4 minutes. 8 remained. Nam Tai-sik was 7 steps from the door of his private jet when he stopped. He did not stumble. He did not look confused. He simply stopped, the way a man stops when something deep inside him says to be still. The roar of the jet engines was too loud. He hadn't heard a single word of the intercom announcement echoing across the tarmac, but he didn't need to hear it to know the atmosphere had entirely fractured. His assistant spoke quickly into a phone beside him. 2 members of his security team moved forward and then held their position, unsure of the threat or where it was coming from. On the tarmac, 3 airport security vehicles rolled out from the side terminal, lights flashing but sirens off. A supervisor in an orange vest was shouting into his radio, waving his arms to halt the ground equipment. Tae-sik turned slowly and looked toward the terminal building. From that distance, Brianna could not see his eyes clearly through the glass, but she did not look away. Nobody was boarding. Nobody was moving. The operation had been shattered. The emergency inspection team moved fast. 4 technicians in blue coveralls entered the cargo hold of Flight KA-7 with flashlights and equipment cases, while 2 airport security officers stood at the base of the stairs. Brianna watched from a holding area inside the terminal, a paper cup of cold water in her hands that she had not drunk. It took 11 minutes. Then one of the technicians climbed back down the stairs and spoke quietly to the senior officer, and the senior officer's face changed completely. They brought out 2 military-grade parachutes packed into black nylon bags with no airline markings. Then they brought out a photograph of the secondary engine's wiring panel, not the engine itself, but the photograph was enough. Someone had cut and reconnected 3 wires in a very specific sequence. An aviation expert later explained that this kind of fault would not trigger any warning light during pre-flight checks. It would only become a problem at high altitude under sustained pressure, eyes exactly above the mountain range. Brianna sat down slowly. Her legs had finally stopped working properly. They put her in a small room with a gray table and 2 chairs and told her someone wanted to speak with her. She expected a police officer or an airport investigator. The door opened and Nam Tae-sik walked in alone. He sat down across from her without any introduction and looked at her for a long moment without speaking. When he finally spoke, his English was flawless, precise, and carried the weight of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. He didn't ask her to speak Russian, he didn't understand the language, and he hadn't even heard her announcement over the engines. Instead, he asked her in English to explain the exact technical details she had translated from the pilot's conversation. He asked a follow-up question about the secondary engine's fuel regulation, testing her to see if she would trip up on the lie. She answered without hesitating. Something shifted in his expression, not quite emotion, but a loosening of the careful stillness he wore like armor. He said very quietly that the flight carried 23 passengers and 6 crew members. He said she had saved all of them. Then he asked her name. "Brianna Harris," she said. He nodded once as if storing it somewhere important. Shin Woo sat in the detention room with his hands folded on the table and his posture completely relaxed, as if he had been asked to wait for a delayed flight rather than placed under arrest. 2 investigators sat across from him with folders and recording equipment. He answered their questions briefly and without visible emotion. He confirmed his name. He confirmed his relationship to Tae-sik. He denied everything else. But then, near the end of the session, when one investigator pressed him on who had authorized the payment, Shin Woo smiled. It was a small smile, patient and almost gentle, the kind that carries a warning inside it. He said that the people who planned this kind of operation did not leave their names on anything. He said that finding the money trail would take months, and that by then, certain things would have already changed. He looked at the recording device on the table and then looked back at the investigator calmly. He did not say another word after that, but the smile stayed. That was the part that stayed in the room long after he was led away. The 2 pilots broke within an hour of each other. The taller one went first. His hands were shaking before the investigator even asked the first question. He said that 3 months ago, a man he had never seen before left a photograph on the windshield of his car. The photograph was of his daughter walking home from school. No note, no message, just the photograph. A week later, he received a phone call with instructions. He was told that if he followed them exactly, his family would not be touched. The second pilot's story was nearly identical, except the threat involved his younger brother, who had a disability and lived alone. Neither man had any political motive. Neither man had been paid a significant amount. They had simply been terrified into obedience by people who knew exactly which pressure points to find. Both pilots wept during questioning. Both asked repeatedly about their families. Investigators confirmed that surveillance on both families had been real and ongoing for weeks. These were not willing participants. They were ordinary men who had been broken carefully and used like tools. The intelligence officer's name was Agent Seo, and she delivered the information to the senior investigator in a flat, matter-of-fact voice that made it sound routine, even though it was not. 40 minutes after Shinwoo's detention, a communication had been intercepted on an encrypted channel. The message was short. It referenced the intercom announcement on the tarmac and identified the person who made it as a problem. It did not use Brianna's name, but it included her employee ID number, a description of her uniform, and the terminal she was working in. Someone inside the airport, or connected to someone inside the airport, had already identified her. And Agent Seo slid a printed copy of the intercepted message across the table. The senior investigator read it twice and then picked up his phone. 2 floors below, Brianna Harris was still sitting in the gray room finishing the cold water she had never drunk before. She did not know yet that the people who hired Shinwoo now knew exactly who she was. She did not know that her name was already moving through channels she could not see. The hospital corridor was quiet at 10:30 at night. Brianna had arrived 30 minutes earlier to check on her sister Tashia, who was still recovering in room 114. She had just stepped out to get water from the vending machine at the end of the hall when she heard the sound. A soft click, like a door latch being handled too carefully by someone who did not want to be heard. She turned around. A man in a gray jacket was moving toward Tashia's room with his hand inside his coat pocket. He was not a doctor. He was not a visitor. Everything about how he moved was wrong. Brianna did not think. She grabbed the metal IV stand leaning against the wall beside her and moved toward him fast. She hit him across the shoulder hard enough to knock him sideways into the wall. He was bigger than her and recovered quickly, and for 30 seconds it was very bad. Then 2 men in dark clothing appeared at the far end of the corridor, running. Tae-6 men. They reached her before the man in the gray jacket did. By midnight, Tashia's hospital bed had been replaced by a wide room on the 31st floor of a building in the city's financial district. The room had thick curtains, a private bathroom, and 2 guards stationed outside the door who changed shifts every 4 hours. Brianna sat on the edge of the bed, while a medical attendant checked Tashia's vitals and adjusted the portable drip that had come with them in the transfer vehicle. Tashia was groggy and confused and kept asking where they were. Brianna told her they were somewhere safe and that she would explain everything later. That was not entirely true, because Brianna herself did not fully understand what she had stepped into. The penthouse level had 4 cameras in every hallway and a security desk staffed by 3 people at all times. Tae-6 had arranged everything within 45 minutes of the hospital incident, which told Brianna something important about the kind of infrastructure the man operated with. She did not feel grateful yet. She felt like a person who had opened one door and found another locked door directly behind it. She found him in the kitchen at 3 a.m. He was standing at the counter with a glass of water, still fully dressed, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling window at the city lights below. He did not seem surprised that she was awake. Brianna sat down at the kitchen island, and neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Tae-6 said, without turning around, that he had spent 15 years building walls around himself and calling it discipline. He said that somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing the people around him as people. Staff became functions. Assistants became tools. He said it quietly, without drama, the way someone says a thing they have been carrying for a long time and have finally decided to set down. He turned and looked at her then. Well, he said that a woman with 48 hours left on a contract and overdue medical bills had heard what his own security team had missed. He said he did not have a comfortable explanation for that. Brianna looked at him steadily. She said she did not need him to have one. The financial trail took investigators 4 days to untangle, and when Agent SEO presented the results, the room went very quiet. The money that funded the operation had moved through 3 offshore accounts in 2 different countries before arriving in Shin-woo's network. It was a careful and professional arrangement, the kind that required both resources and experience. But the last transfer in the chain had a second authorization signature attached to it, a requirement built into the account structure that meant no single person could release the funds alone. The first signature belonged to Shin-woo. The second signature was traced through a holding company, then through a property trust, and then to a single registered name, Nam Soo-jin, Tae-sik's younger sister. Agent Seo watched the senior investigator's face when she said the name out loud. He did not react immediately. He read the documentation twice, slowly, and then asked her to confirm the chain of evidence was clean and unbroken. She confirmed it. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Outside the window, as the city moved on as though nothing had changed, Nam Soo-jin arrived at the penthouse the following afternoon carrying flowers, pale yellow ones that smelled faintly of something soft and expensive. She was smaller than Brianna had expected, with a gentle face and careful eyes, and a voice that stayed warm even when it was saying nothing important. She embraced her brother at the door and held his arm while she spoke to him, asking about his health, about the investigation, about whether he was eating properly. Then she turned to Brianna and smiled, and the smile was so natural and open that Brianna almost smiled back without thinking. Soo-jin said she had heard what Brianna did on the tarmac and that it was one of the bravest things she had ever known anyone to do. She asked about Tashia and whether she needed anything. She touched Brianna's hand briefly when she spoke. She was warm and present and completely at ease. But Brianna noticed that behind all of it, Nam Soo-jin's eyes were doing something different from her mouth. They were moving carefully around the room, taking inventory. Brianna said thank you and kept her own expression pleasant and gave nothing away. The gala was held on the top floor of a building that seemed designed to make ordinary people feel small. The ceilings were high, the lighting was gold, and every person in the room wore the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. Tae-sik moved through the crowd with Brianna positioned 2 steps behind him at his request. Not as decoration, he had said, but because he trusted her eyes more than most people in the room. She understood what he meant within the first 20 minutes. There were smiles that did not reach eyes. There were handshakes held a second too long. There were men who greeted Tae-sik warmly and then watched him walk away with expressions they did not bother to hide quickly enough. A woman in a silver dress near the east window stopped talking the moment Tae-sik passed and did not start again until he was far enough away. Brianna catalogued everything quietly. The room was full of people who respected Nam Tae-sik the way you respect something dangerous, not with affection, with calculation. Agent Seo came to the penthouse early on a Thursday morning with a sealed folder and an expression that had no softness in it. She sat down across from Tae-sik at the long table in the secured meeting room and laid out the documents one by one without rushing. The financial evidence was now concrete and fully verified. 3 separate transactions, each moved through a different institution in a different country, all traced back through layers of holding companies and legal structures to a single point of origin. Nam Soo-jin had not merely co-signed the account. She had initiated 2 of the 3 transfers herself. Tae-sik sat completely still through the entire presentation. He did not interrupt. He did not ask Agent Seo to slow down. When she finished, he looked at the documents for a long time without speaking. Then he asked if the evidence was strong enough to hold in court. Agent Seo said it was. Di Shin-woo had been in detention for 6 days when he asked to speak to an investigator without his lawyer present. The request surprised everyone, but they granted it. He sat down, straightened his collar out of habit, and then said, simply and without decoration, that he had not designed the operation. He had managed it. He had recruited the pilots, arranged the parachutes, and handled the payments, but none of those decisions had originated with him. Like every significant choice had come from above him. He said he had believed in the beginning that he was protecting the family's business interests and that certain people had convinced him Taesik's direction was going to destroy everything that had been built. He said he had been told the operation was authorized at the highest level within the inner circle. When the investigator asked him to name the person who gave him his instructions, Shin Woo looked down at the table. While he was quiet for almost a full minute, then he said the name the investigators already suspected but had not yet heard spoken aloud in that room. He said it once, clearly, and did not repeat it. They brought Soo-jin in for formal questioning on a Friday afternoon. For the first 40 minutes, she was composed and articulate and expressed appropriate concern about the investigation. Then the lead investigator placed the financial records on the table in front of her, and something behind her eyes shifted. She did not collapse. She did not deny everything. Instead, she sat back in her chair and let out a slow breath, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. The warmth was gone. She said that she had worked inside her brother's organization for 11 years. She had negotiated contracts, managed relationships, and protected his reputation in ways that never appeared on any official record. She said that Taesik had taken all of it and built his name on top of it while she remained invisible, introduced at events as his sister and nothing more. She said that at some point invisible becomes unbearable. She said power was not something she wanted for vanity. She said she had simply grown tired of building a house she was never allowed to live in. Her voice was steady throughout. That was the most frightening part. The call came at 6:17 in the evening. Brianna was in the penthouse sitting room reviewing documents with Agent Sao when her phone buzzed on the table. She did not recognize the number. She answered and heard nothing for 2 seconds. Then she heard Tashia's voice, short and cut off quickly, as if the phone had been taken away mid-word. A different voice came on the line, male, calm. He said Tashia was safe for now and that Brianna should think carefully before speaking to any investigator again. He said the people he worked for were patient, but not unlimited in their patience. Then the call ended. Brianna set the phone down on the table very carefully. Agent Sao was already on her feet. They confirmed within 8 minutes that Tashia's secured room was empty. The guard who had been stationed outside the door was found locked inside a supply closet at the end of the hall, unharmed but unconscious. No cameras in the stairwell had recorded anyone leaving the building. Whoever had taken Tashia had known the layout, the guard rotation, and exactly where the blind spots were. They found Soo-jin in a private warehouse on the south side of the city, the kind of building that appeared empty from the outside, but was not. Taesik's security team moved in from 3 entry points simultaneously, while Brianna stayed in the vehicle as instructed. She did not stay long. She heard Tashia's voice through the open door, and she was inside before anyone could stop her. Soo-jin was standing near the back wall with 2 of her people, and the particular stillness of someone who knows the situation has closed around them. She looked at Brianna without flinching. Then she said something that nobody in the room was prepared for. She said that the rainy Tuesday night 4 years ago, the accident that killed Brianna's parents on the highway, had not been an accident. She said a vehicle had been redirected that night as part of an operation to move a person of interest away from a specific route. She said Brianna's parents had simply been on the wrong road at the wrong moment. She said it the way you state a fact you have long since made peace with. Taesik had been standing 6 feet behind Brianna when Soo-jin spoke. Brianna heard him go completely still. Not the controlled stillness he usually carried. This was different. This was the stillness of a person whose understanding of something fundamental has just been taken apart and laid on the floor in pieces. He said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than Brianna had ever heard it. He asked Soo-jin to confirm what she had said. Soo-jin confirmed it without hesitation. The operation 4 years ago had been run through a subsidiary his organization had since dissolved. The redirect order had caused a 3-vehicle collision on a wet highway, 2 fatalities, both civilian, both unintended, both covered over in the final report. Taysik turned and looked at Brianna, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked like a man who did not know what to do with his hands. The girl who had stepped in front of danger to save his life had lost her entire family to the edges of his world. He had not known. That did not make it smaller. Tashia was in a back room behind a locked door, sitting on a folded blanket on the floor with her hands zip-tied in front of her and a strip of tape across her mouth. She was frightened but physically unharmed. One of Taysik's men cut the ties and helped her to her feet, while another cleared the room. Brianna came through the door 30 seconds later and crossed the room without slowing down. She held her sister for a long time without saying anything. Tashia was shaking slightly, almost the way the body shakes after fear finally has permission to leave. Outside the room, Soo-jin was walked out of the warehouse by 2 investigators with her wrists secured behind her. She did not struggle. She did not speak. She moved with the same composed posture she had carried in every room Brianna had ever seen her in, as if being arrested were simply another meeting she had prepared for. The agents placed her in the back of a vehicle and the door closed. Brianna watched from the warehouse entrance with Tashia's hand held tightly in hers and said nothing at all. The days that followed were quiet in the way that feels heavier than noise. Brianna moved Tashia into a small serviced apartment on the other side of the city, away from the penthouse and the security teams and everything that reminded her of the last 2 weeks. She answered the investigators' questions when they called. She signed what needed to be signed. But she stopped returning Taysik's messages after the 3rd day. Not out of anger, or not only that, it was something more complicated and harder to name. She had spent 4 years believing her parents died because of rain and a wet road and the particular cruelty of random chance. That version of events had been painful, but it had been bearable. This new version had a shape to it. It had a cause. It had people and decisions and a chain of choices that led directly to that highway on that Tuesday night. Grief, she was learning, can be carried for years and then cracked open again by a single sentence and become something entirely new and unbearable. She sat with Tashia each evening and tried to remember how to just breathe. Taysik called a formal meeting of his senior board on a Wednesday morning and dismissed 4 of them before the session ended. The 2 were referred directly to investigators. A 3rd resigned before he could be removed. The subsidiary responsible for the operation 4 years ago was formally dissolved and its remaining assets frozen pending a full legal review. He made no public speech. He released a single written statement through his legal office that was precise and short and did not attempt to minimize anything. He named the internal failures. He named the structural rot that had been allowed to grow inside an organization he had believed was clean. And in the final paragraph, he addressed his sister directly, not with cruelty and not with forgiveness, but with a clarity that left no room for interpretation. He said the ties were cut. He said they would not be restored. The statement was published on a Thursday afternoon. By Friday morning, it had been read by every major financial publication in the region. Taysik sat alone in the meeting room afterward, in a building that felt different now, quieter and considerably more honest. Brianna submitted her university application on a gray morning in October, sitting at the small kitchen table while Tashia slept in the next room. The program was a 4-year aviation engineering degree with a specialization track in aircraft safety systems. She had researched it for 3 weeks before applying. I'm reading through course outlines and industry reports and technical papers on mechanical fault detection until the language started to feel familiar. The admissions panel later told her that her personal statement was one of the most unusual they had received. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was specific. She did not write about ambition in general terms. She wrote about a secondary engine, a fuel regulation system, and 3 wires reconnected in a sequence designed to kill 29 people above a mountain range. She wrote about what it meant that the fault had been invisible to every standard check. She wrote about the gap between what current detection systems could find and what they were missing. She said she intended to close that gap. The panel offered her a place within 2 weeks. Harris Aviation Safety Solutions opened its doors 5 years later in a modest office building 2 blocks from the university where Brianna had studied. It did not stay modest for long. Within 18 months, the company had developed a pre-flight diagnostic protocol that could identify the specific class of wiring interference used in the KA-7 sabotage attempt, as well as 11 variations of it that investigators had documented in other cases across a 12-year period. Airlines in 4 countries adopted the protocol in the first year. By the 3rd year, Harris Aviation had 42 employees and a contract with an international flight safety board that Brianna had pursued for 8 months without stopping. She was 31 years old. On the morning the contract was signed, she received a photograph by message. It was Tashia in a white coat, standing outside a hospital entrance, holding her medical school graduation certificate with both hands and grinning so wide it looked like her face could barely contain it. Brianna set her phone face up on the desk where she could see it for the rest of the day. The jet that landed at Terminal 4 on a clear Thursday morning bore a small Harris Aviation Safety Certification seal on the interior inspection panel near the cockpit door. Brianna was on the tarmac because she had been invited for a routine post-flight system review, or so the message had said. She was standing near the ground crew barrier with a tablet in her hand when the stairs were lowered and Nam Tae-sik walked down them alone. He had not changed in any dramatic way. He still moved with the same quiet authority. But something in his face was different, open in a way it had not been before, like a window that had finally been allowed to let air in. He walked toward her without hurrying and stopped at the painted ground marker 7 feet from where she stood. She recognized the spot. She had stood in almost exactly that position 5 years ago with an intercom receiver in her hand and 12 minutes left to stop everything from ending. Tae-sik looked at the marker and then looked at her. Then he knelt down on one knee on the tarmac and asked her to build the rest of it with him. And that brings us to the end of Brianna and Nam Tae-sik's incredible journey. Family, if there is one powerful lesson we can take away from this story, it is this. You are never too invisible to change the world. Brianna had everything against her. She was broke, exhausted, and ignored, yet she chose to speak up when everyone else turned their backs. She didn't let the darkest tragedy of her past destroy her. Instead, she forged that pain into a massive purpose that ended up saving lives. Remember this. True power isn't about the wealth you hold or the fear you command. It's about the courage to do what is right when you have everything to lose, and the strength to turn your deepest pain into your greatest triumph. What did you think of Brianna's ultimate bravery and Tae-sik's massive reality check? Drop your thoughts and your favorite moment in the comments below. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. I share this video with someone who loves a great story, and make sure to subscribe to Afro K Mafia Diary so you never miss out on our next upload. Thanks for watching.